Great nations do not fight endless wars.
Gee whiz. I never thought I'd get nostalgic for 2019 Trump. It's Wednesday, March 4th. I'm Greg Walters, in for Jane Coaston, and this is What a Day, the show that noted yesterday Oklahoma Republican Senator Markwayne Mullin couldn't keep straight whether America is at war with Iran or Iraq. And now, he doesn't seem totally sure whether we're at war at all.
This is war, and we're taking out the threat.
Got it. This is a war. But I thought only Congress could declare a war.
You'll concede this is war.
We haven't declared war. They declared war on us, but we haven't.
War, Secretary Hicks said
Senator, when
we
you
haven't
walked up
declared.
just now, you said this is war.
They've called it war.
They've called it war. What I was saying.
Okay,
well, that was a misspoke. What I was saying that they've declared war on us, but war is ugly. It always has been ugly.
You know, at least we can agree on that last part. On today's show, the State Department scrambles to help thousands of Americans stuck in the Middle East, and Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem faces tough questions from senators about immigration enforcement and her personal history of canine execution. But first, a very big, happy, oh my God, the midterms are finally upon us day to all those who celebrate, because yesterday marked the first official primaries ahead of this November's big vote. Ballots were still being counted as we were recording this on Tuesday evening, and we'll be back tomorrow with a breakdown of who's up, who's down, and what we can learn from the results in Texas, North Carolina, and Arkansas. And that includes how the electorate is feeling about a certain you-know-who and all of his ludicrous mishigas, like this war he just got us into. Specifically, the kind of war that President Donald Trump spent the last decade promising he would never lead us into. Here he is during the State of the Union address in 2019.
As a candidate for president, I loudly pledged a new approach. Great nations do not fight endless wars.
Gee whiz. I never thought I'd get nostalgic for 2019 Trump. But this war in Iran isn't just sowing chaos, death, and destruction for an uncertain period of time without any apparent plan or endgame. It's also making one extremely important commodity a lot more expensive: oil. And I'm no economist, but I recall Donald Trump boasting that he would make the price of oil and gasoline go down or something. And here he is speaking on Sinclair before the election in 2024.
And I'm going to cut fuel prices in half within 12 months so that, because the energy costs are so high.
Instead, we're now looking at a bait and switch of downright historic proportions. On both fronts. Thanks to his war of choice against Iran, all traffic has stopped in the Middle Eastern waterway called the Strait of Hormuz, which happens to handle 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil consumed in the world. Now you might be asking yourself, is this all part of some diabolically clever plan, run on peace and low gas prices, and then impulsively start a war that pushes oil prices up? Or is it, as I once heard someone say, Donald Trump doesn't play 17-dimensional chess. He eats the pieces. To find out, I spoke to Miles Taylor, the guy that you might remember as Anonymous. Now, he served as the chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security in the first Trump administration, where he caused a big hoopla by writing an op-ed in the New York Times headlined, "I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration." That prompted Trump to sign a memorandum stating Taylor's actions might have been treasonous and calling for an investigation. Now, Miles is the founder of a website, defiance.org, a civic club focused on countering Trump's abuses of power. Miles, welcome to What a Day.
Great to be with you, my friend.
We've been hearing a lot about the Strait of Hormuz, but what is that and why should we care?
Well, look, most people don't spend their days too worried about a little tiny waterway in the Middle East, but that all just changed, Greg, because the Strait of Hormuz, which is a waterway that at its thinnest point is only 21 miles across, is a critical choke point for goods and services, but especially one big thing, oil. And within the past 2 days, the Iranians have sealed that strait. Why does that matter? Well, Greg, 20% of the world's oil supply goes through that strait. And even if the Iranians hadn't closed it, shipping companies are so worried that their boats will be destroyed either in the crossfire or by deliberate sabotage in this war with Iran that they're not crossing it anymore. Their insurance companies don't want them to do it. Their own boat drivers and employees don't want them to do it. The obvious question that your average person would have is, well, isn't there some other way around this? I mean, if you look at a map and you see the Strait of Hormuz just south of Iran, just north of Oman, you would think, well, there's got to be some way to get this across land. And there are pipelines in the region. But by and large, Greg, the answer is no. You really can't get around it. You can't get that much oil around it. Nothing has been built to make that happen. So you're largely stuck with this problem. If the strait is closed, a lot of the world's oil supply is stopped. And that's bad news, because if 20% of the world's oil supply is choked off for very long, it could have massive repercussions for the global economy.
But wait a minute. So I thought America didn't import oil from Iran because of sanctions. So why does this impact us?
Well, look, you think of it like a balloon that you squeeze. If you squeeze it in one place, the pressure is going to go to another part of the balloon. So even if Iranian oil is not coming to the United States, constrictions in the global supply affect the United States. What's more than that, it's not just Iranian oil we are worried about here. And there are folks in the Trump administration who would say, well, don't worry because we're not dependent on Iranian oil. Yeah, but that's not the only thing passing through the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, most of the oil going through that strait isn't Iranian oil. It's oil from other countries in the region that has to transfer through that critical point to make it. Here's the other piece. We have seen this multiple times throughout history when there is shipping delays, traffic, problems with some of these major oil routes that these container ships go through. It directly affects prices at the pump. But that means something else much, much bigger, Greg, which is that groceries, stereos that you buy at the store, all goods you buy in one way, shape, or form are dependent on oil. They're dependent on gasoline vehicles, airplanes and trucks and other ships moving those products across the world. So all of those products are going to go up in price because the companies aren't going to want to shoulder that burden. They're going to pass it on to consumers. That leads to the magic word, the dangerous word here, which is inflation. The closing of this little tiny waterway south of Iran has the capacity to supercharge inflation all around the globe if it lasts too long.
So play this out for me. How bad could this get?
Bad. Very, very bad. And here's what I want to compare it to. I don't want to be alarmist. I don't want to make people panic. But the last time we saw a similar series of events like this was back in 2008. Now, oil has gone up and has had spikes, certainly since 2008. But this sort of eerie series of events echoes what we saw before the financial crisis. Why? Because back then in 2008, there was a lot of concern that the Iranians were moving towards a nuclear capability. There was concern that that might lead to military conflict in the region. And markets, the jitters in the markets, started to price oil higher. Oil started off at the beginning of 2008 around $90 a barrel, kind of historically high, but not terrifyingly high. Then that number skyrocketed to $150 a barrel. That was a historic number in the summer of 2008, which resulted in inflation around the globe. That meant businesses that had tight margins, individual households that had tight margins could not afford the price increases. That is the domino that pushed the markets over the edge. We are seeing something similar happen right now. Just in the handful of days since the Trump administration and the Israelis started to bomb Iran, we've seen oil spike close to $15 a barrel. It's not quite over that $100 a barrel margin that you really start to worry about, but it's trending fast in that direction. That's what people need to keep their eye on. If that price starts to go too high, markets are going to get really worried that there won't be time for a correction, and you're going to see inflation prices start to make their way to store shelves.
So you're talking about this war leading to higher inflation. It strikes me there's an irony here, which is that, as I recall, Trump campaigned on a few things, including keeping America out of what he called stupid wars and lowering the price of everything. Does it feel like Trump is delivering on those promises with this campaign to bomb Iran?
No, I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. You would only do something like this if you weren't looking into the future or you intentionally wanted to destroy people's bank accounts. And I cannot imagine that any politician, love or hate Donald Trump, wants to intentionally destroy people's bank accounts. And so it's got to be the first one. You're doing something so heedless, you're not considering the secondary and tertiary consequences. I mean, anyone who has studied the region knows that the Strait of Hormuz is this critical geopolitical choke point. And there has always been conversation that in a war with Iran, this is one of the first things you would worry about. This was a known, but clearly was something that the Trump administration was not thinking about and is something that's going to have enormous repercussions in the midterm elections. And affordability is the number one thing those Republicans are hearing from their constituents that they are mad about. They are worried they will lose the House and maybe the Senate because prices are so expensive. What has their president, Donald Trump, gone and done? One more thing that has the capability to supercharge inflation and make that problem worse. I cannot imagine that right now on Capitol Hill behind closed doors, there are very excited conversations among the Republican caucus about this war. This is the type of thing that will guarantee their losses in November if they don't pressure the White House to turn it around.
You worked in the first Trump administration and saw how decisions were made firsthand. You're famous for announcing to the world that you were quietly, secretly, working against his craziest decisions from the inside. In your view, do people inside the administration now understand these risks that you're talking about? I mean, is there a plan, or is this just bomb first, plan later?
Look, Greg, I honestly think it's the latter. And what I did in the first Trump administration is the absolute bare minimum you should expect from any public servant. It's not heroic to comply with the law. That's the expectation. And the only defiance that we undertook in the first Trump administration was saying no when the president wanted to break the law or was going to put lives in danger. I don't see that happening anymore. I don't see folks in this administration saying no. And this heedless attack on Iran that's putting the global economy at risk, by the way, is the perfect example.
So tie this all together for me. What does this tell us about Trump's priorities as he's asking Americans to give his party control of Congress once again?
Look, this says, pure and simple, that Donald Trump cares about Donald Trump and not the average American. And you don't even need to know anything about foreign policy, national security, or economics to see that. All you need to do is to look at the side by side. Donald Trump announced this war from his ballroom in Mar-a-Lago as people feet away danced the night away. 2 days later, his first real conversation about it with the American people was inside the White House, where he stood there and briefly pivoted away from talking about Medal of Honor recipients to talking about the gold drapes in the White House and the giant ballroom he was building. Donald Trump is the most out-of-touch billionaire that's ever occupied the Oval Office, and that is bleeding into his actual decision-making. One more data point, the Washington Post just reported this week that one of the key reasons Donald Trump wanted to go to war with Iran is that their leaders had targeted him. Their leaders had tried to undermine his personal security and had threatened Donald Trump. And his quote was, "I got them before they got me." This is personal for Donald Trump and personally affects the rest of us.
Miles, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, my friend.
And that was my conversation with Miles Taylor, founder of Defiance.org and former DHS chief of staff in Trump's first term. And just to clarify, that quote he mentioned at the end was actually from an interview Trump did with ABC News on Sunday. The president was talking about Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and he said, quote, "I got him before he got me."
Are you subscribed to What A Day? Hitting subscribe is one of the easiest things you can do right now to keep yourself up to speed on everything happening in this wildly chaotic news cycle in a way that won't take over your entire day. It also helps other people find the show, which means more people actually knowing what's going on. And that feels pretty important right now. So subscribe, give us a like, and we'll keep showing up 5 days a week because we have to. And we love you. If you're already a subscriber, thank you. We'll be back with headlines after some ads.
What a Day is brought to you by ZBiotics. Now let's face it, after a night with drinks, I just don't bounce back the next day like I used to. Now I have to make a choice. I can either have a great night or a great next day. And that is until I found pre-alcohol. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's a buildup of this byproduct and not dehydration that's to blame for rough days after drinking. And pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Now just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Fortunately for me, when Crooked Media throws one of our very fun holiday parties, there is almost always somebody passing out the little bottles of Z-Biotics, which means I can let loose at the party and still hold it together the next day. The first person who ever handed me a Z-Biotics before a party told me it was a game changer, and in my experience, they were right. March is a marathon of social events. From the slopes to the bracket watch parties to Guinness on St. Patrick's Day, pre-alcohol is the tool you need to fully enjoy the end of winter. Go to zbiotics.com/WAD to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use WAD at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/WAD and use the code WAD at checkout for 15% off. This episode of What a Day is brought to you by Wild Grain. Wild Grain is the first bake from frozen subscription box for sourdough breads, artisanal pastries, and fresh pastas. Unlike many store-bought options, Wild Grain uses simple ingredients you can pronounce and a slow fermentation process that can be easier on your belly and richer in nutrients and antioxidants. Plus, all items conveniently bake in 25 minutes or less with no thawing required. Wild Grain's boxes are fully customizable. In addition to their variety box, they have a gluten-free box, a vegan box, and a new protein box. Personally, I think there is literally nothing better than the smell of fresh, baked bread. It just makes the whole home feel inviting and awesome. And whenever I'm putting together a really kick-ass breakfast, I go for the Wild Grain croissants. Not only do they just taste amazing, all warm and flaky and buttery, but you also get to enjoy the aroma, which kicks up the whole vibe to the next level before you even bite into one. Imagine having fresh, bakery-quality bread, pastries, and pasta at home without any trips to the store. And don't just take my word for it. They have over 40,000 five-star reviews and have been voted the best food subscription box by USA Today for 3 years in a row. For a limited time, Wild Grain is offering our listeners $30 off your first box, plus free croissants for life when you go to wildgrain.com/WAD to start your subscription today. That's $30 off your first box and free croissants for life when you visit wildgrain.com/WAD, or you can use promo code WAD at checkout.
Headlines. A drone unfortunately struck a parking lot adjacent to the Chancellery building and set off a fire in that place. All personnel are accounted for. As you're aware, we began drawing down personnel from our diplomatic facilities in advance of this.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke with reporters on Tuesday shortly after an Iranian drone hit a parking lot next to the U.S. consulate in Dubai. United Arab Emirates officials said the strike caused a fire, but that they were able to contain it. This was just one of several retaliatory attacks made by Iran this week against U.S. consulates and embassies in the Middle East. Drones hit U.S. embassy buildings in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, but no casualties have been reported in those incidents either. Iran has also reportedly damaged energy facilities across the Middle East. Deaths from Iranian strikes have been reported in countries including Israel, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. But the death toll in those countries so far remains relatively low compared to the Iranian Red Crescent's estimate of 787 killed in Iran. The State Department is urging Americans to evacuate from more than a dozen countries in the Middle East. The main problem for the people being told to leave is that many airports are closed and airways are restricted amid the war with Iran. The State Department says they are coordinating with around 3,000 Americans who are among hundreds of thousands of travelers trying to leave the region. On Tuesday, Trump was asked why his administration didn't have a better plan to help Americans abroad.
Why wasn't there an evacuation plan, and will you send planes to get people out?
Well, because it happened all very quickly.
Ah, yes. And how could Trump possibly have guessed how quickly war would break out when he started it? State Department officials said Tuesday that the administration is working to charter flights to help get Americans out of the Middle East. They've also directed people stranded in the region to a State Department phone number for more assistance. But as of this recording, an automated message that plays out when you call says, quote, "Please do not rely on the U.S. government for assisted departure or evacuation at this time." Noted. A lot has happened since Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed in the initial round of U.S. Israeli strikes in Iran on Saturday. For one, President Trump told The Atlantic he was open to talking with Iran's new leadership. But here's the question. Who would Trump talk to? An interim council assumed temporary leadership duties, while a group of clerics called the Assembly of Experts was set to select a new supreme leader. Israel's ambassador to the United States, Yehiel Leiter, told CNN that Israel actually targeted the place where the assembly would appoint that new leader.
We struck in an area where the electors were meeting to appoint a new supreme leader, somebody who would be in charge of spreading death and mayhem both in Iran and outside of Iran. And there's a very good chance that the electors will not be readily available for any further meetings.
According to the Times of Israel, an Israeli defense source said it's unclear how many members of the electors were in the building, if any. The New York Times cites the Iranian Fars news agency, which says that the assembly had met virtually and that nobody was in the building. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee on Tuesday. Noem repeatedly dodged accountability for falsely accusing Renee Good and Alex Preddy of domestic terrorism. Good and Preddy were both killed by immigration officers in Minnesota in January. Democrat Dick Durbin from Illinois was one of several senators who confronted Noem.
How did you think that calling them domestic terrorists at that scene was somehow going to calm the situation?
You know, Senator, we are working in those situations where there's a tragic loss of life and that there is something that our agents are involved in, that we continue to deliver information.
Is it so hard to say you were wrong?
We continue, as these investigations continue to go, we will provide, I absolutely strive to provide factual information.
Spoiler alert, Noem did not admit that she was wrong. And it wasn't just Democrats who expressed frustration with Noem. North Carolina Republican Tom Tillis even compared Noem's poor leadership to the infamous stories she's told about her decisions to kill a dog and a goat that belonged to her family.
But my point is, those are bad decisions made in the heat of the moment, not unlike what happened up in Minneapolis. I expect we're an exceptional nation. And one of the reasons we're exceptional is we expect exceptional leadership.
You may not be surprised to hear that Tillis is retiring when his term is up early next year. And that's the news. That's all for today. If you like the show, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, ponder whether we really need a Game of Thrones movie or if we're just going to get one, and tell your friends to listen. And if you're into reading, and not just about how Warner Brothers is developing yet another Game of Thrones prequel, like me, What A Day is also a nightly newsletter, one that I just happen to edit. Check it out and subscribe at crooked.com/subscribe. I'm Greg Walters, in for Jane Coaston. And if this movie does get made, that doesn't mean George R.R. Martin is off the hook. He's had 15 years to finish The Winds of Winter. George R.R. Martin, Dracarys.